Welcome to The Insider, a podcast by Heritage Museums and Gardens, where every other week we chat with guests and museum staff about all the exciting things that are happening in season here at the museum. My name is Judith Getz, and I'm happy to be your host today. In this episode, we'll chat with Indy driver, record setter, and broadcast personality Lyn St. James, who recently gave a talk at Heritage. She talked about her rise in the race car scene, what it felt like to be a woman in a male-dominated sport, and about the museum's current special exhibit on the Indy 500.
So I want to welcome everybody to Heritage today for what could prove, and obviously will prove to be a very stimulating conversation with Lyn Saint James. I want to do a little bit of an introduction for those that might not know Lyn. So Lyn competed in the IndyCar series with 11 kart and 5 Indy Racing League starts to her name. She is the second of 9 women who've qualified for the Indianapolis 500 and became the first woman to win the Indianapolis 500 Rookie of the Year award. She's also had 2 victories to the 24 Hours of Daytona and 1 win at the 12 Hours of Sebring. And Lyn, of course, has founded the 501c3 Women of the Winner's Circle Foundation in '94 and established the Project Podium Grant Award. And it's a very sought-after motivational speaker. I want to welcome you.
Thank you.
So for those that might not know exactly, of course, those are your achievements, but tell us a little bit about how all that started. You come from Ohio.
Ooh, well, that was a long time ago. I did grow up in Ohio. I was a car girl before there was such a thing. I kind of grew up in that muscle car era. If we all grew up in the 60s, I look around and we're probably all in that era. You remember that? And so everybody was into cars back in the 60s, it seemed like. I went to a girls' school, so I didn't really have a lot of exposure. I was an only child. My mom had polio, and so for her, a car was everything. I mean, you and I can walk to the corner or ride a bike. She couldn't, and so she was always about the car, to the point that I thought she was a little weird, but you know, that I think that actually probably played a role in maybe me thinking about cars differently than most people. I worked at a gas station in the summertime, and the guys at the gas station were talking about going to the Indy 500, and I thought, God, that's I mean, are you kidding? I said, that sounds so cool, can I go with you? Not necessarily in their excitement world, you know, and they said, well, okay, and then I went home and told my mom, and then my mom said, yeah, you know, no way, unless I go along with you. And I'm like, oh good, this is going to go over even better with the guys at the gas station. So I'm back, hey, I can go, but my mom's got to come along. Well, they actually liked my mom, so I think they were okay better with her coming than me. So that's when I got to go to the Indy 500 for the first time. I lived in Ohio, so we just drove over that morning, and they didn't have, we actually drove over the day before, that's right, and they didn't have a place to stay because a bunch of guys were just going to go and party and whatever. So we had to drive around Speedway, which if you've ever been to the Indy 500 and ever been into the small town of Speedway, it's this little cottage kind of town. It's actually old farm town. They're old farm property, and these are all these little houses. And people in Speedway embrace the 500, and they sell every piece of land that they have. Every spot in their yard is either a parking spot and then they rent rooms, they rent beds, they rent cots in their houses, and so we found a place to stay so that my mom and I could stay there. And my mom didn't go to the race, but I did. But I just remember going to the 500. I got to go to the drivers' meeting, and I remember seeing Mario Andretti and AJ Foyt, and then of course on the day of the drivers' meeting, everybody gets to go around the track in the garage area, except girls were not allowed in the garage area at that time. So I remember going on the outside of the fence while they were all inside. And I'm like, I want an autograph, I want an autograph. And they got Mel Kenyon to come over to the fence and talk to me. And I remember meeting Mel Kenyon, and I don't know if I saw a few heads shake. Mel Kenyon was badly burned and had a lot of disfiguration on his face and his hands. And I just remember that sort of, oh my God, you know, I mean, I was so excited to meet a driver, but at the same time, a bit awestruck about, you know, how he looked. And so all this stuff was in my head, but I was, 17 years old and went back home, and that was all came to a halt. I mean, I went on, and there was nothing to do, no way to do anything. And I never said, oh, I'm going to race in the Indy. I mean, none of that ever came across my mind. But I loved to drive. I was the designated driver with these guys so if they wanted to go drinking, they knew that they could have Lyn to drive the car, because I just love to drive. I've always loved to drive, and still love to drive. So that was all in my life, in my background, but never any thought it would ever lead to anything. And then fast forward, I moved to Florida with my husband. We start a business. We go to the 24 hours of Daytona. We go to the 12 hours of Sebring, and I'm like, oh my God, real people drive race cars. They aren't just superhuman like the Indy guys. And we found out that you could join a club called the Sports Car Club of America. I did that, found out you had to go to driver school to get your competition license. Figured out, okay, I got to do that. Now I need a race car. Well, this is in 1973, and they had just started a new class called showroom stock, where you could literally take a car off the showroom floor and put a roll bar in it and a 5-point seatbelt and a 5-pound fire extinguisher and race it. And so I went out and ordered a Ford Pinto, which was the cheapest of all the eligible cars. And I lived in South Florida at the time, and I special ordered the car with no air conditioning. No power steering, do whatever I could do to not have it take power off the engine. And I started racing. I went to driver's school and I started racing it, and it was my street car. I drove it back and forth to work during the week, and I raced it on weekends. So, I was in my 20s, and it was just a different way, it was different. I mean, times were a little bit different, not that different in a way in the 70s, but at the same time, that's kind of how it started, and I've never stopped.
So I'm thinking about some of the things that, and I'm fast forwarding as well to the time when you're really in that race car. A lot of us have experienced obviously going 55 down the highway and maybe tempting 80 or 90, but the speeds that you were involved with were far beyond that. What does it really feel like when you're in that cockpit with the car?
Well, I explained earlier, and I think this is something that people don't really understand. You really wear the car. I mean, and to be honest, I was that way with the Pinto. I mean, I have to get really comfortable in the car and feel the car. I mean, it's the first time I've ever used math and trigonometry and stuff like that, because if you start looking at every racetrack, you have to look at apexes and corner entries and slip angles, and so there's all this mathematical stuff that you have to process, and so you have to feel the car. You can't, it's really, well, until I got into the Indy cars, you can't see the tires. And yet you're supposed to feel what the tires are doing, because that's how you drive the race car. So when you wear the car, and that's how I feel when I strap in, and of course now when I got to the IndyCar level, they actually pour a seat specially made for each driver's body. So every little spot, small or big, is now formed, is covered with foam and form fitting. And so it is the most comfortable place in the race car that I've ever really been in, better than any comfy chair or whatever. So you wear the car, you feel the car, and then, you're not really, thankfully, they don't really tell you how fast you're going unless you want. Now with all of the technology, you can put that on your dash if you want, but I don't want to know. I want to know that I'm going as absolutely fast as the car will go, and when we collect the data, we come back and then we know by looking at the traces, If you're processing numbers, in my mind, it's nothing more than a distraction. So you're looking for RPMs, and you know that if you're carrying more RPMs at any given point, that means you were going faster. So it's just it's a really personal, intimate kind of experience and feeling that you have with the car.
Now, I know when we had lunch yesterday, one of the topics that came up was the whole idea of, is it really a sport, and is it really something that is physically demanding?
Yeah, I think race car drivers have had a long time trying to convince sports writers that we're really athletes. I think most of the fans know, but when I was racing the Pinto, and I know Wendy's here and she races a Miata, and there's some other racers probably here that race. I mean, even in that Pinto, I would come back after a weekend of racing, and my upper body and across my chest and my arms were really sore. And even though I played tennis and I was physically active, I was amazed at how sore. So it uses different muscles. Fast forward, when I started racing prototypes and really, really sophisticated cars, I found out that I needed to train a lot more. And I also found out that we maintain 85% of our max cardiovascular the entire time we're in the car. They put a heart race monitor on race car drivers when they were testing. So we're like Peter, who races on the foot race, right? These marathon runners and all that. I can't run a marathon, let me tell you, but my heart rate when I was at my prime younger, I had to maintain that. And it wasn't just adrenaline. I hate it when people just think it's adrenaline. It's because it's physical exertion, and we are also absorbing the energy of the car as the car goes around the track. So we're exerting energy and we are absorbing energy. And then the car doesn't want to turn. I mean, it only wants to go straight. You see how these big tires are, and even those little skinny tires, I don't know how the hell they ever drove those things around. But, the car doesn't want to turn. So the physical force that it takes to not only turn it, but to control it in the turn the right amount. So it's very physically exertion and demanding, and we do train as athletes. And we train for strength, but also endurance. And it's a different training, endurance strength. I always say we don't have to carry the car. We just have to drive it, and we have to be in control of it.
Now, there are a lot of things that are done as far as training is concerned. One of the things you had mentioned as well was ping pong.
There's a place in Indianapolis called PitFit, and they are now training. It's a specific training center for race car drivers, and it's absolutely fabulous. And I was just there, but I was looking at their video that you can on YouTube or on Facebook. And so they're doing ping pong, not just ping pong, but where you stand on a rolled balance beam. So you're playing ping pong while you're balancing yourself on one of these rolls, across. So it's about balance, it's about core strength, it's about reaction time. They have all kinds of special equipment that I actually worked with back in the 80s and 90s. They have a Dynavision where there's light bars, so it's about reaction time, anticipatory reaction time, and visual acuity and peripheral vision. And so you have to know, I was trying to explain it to your staff earlier that work here. I mean, we can't move our head. It's like if normally I want to talk to you, even if I didn't have this mic, I turn my head, right? You can't turn your head in the car. So you're really very locked in. I mean, my helmet would sit in the pocket whether my head's in it or not. That's how tight it's in there. And so you can't move your head. So that means you have to absorb all of the visual signals and acuities through your eyes and through your butt, what you're feeling, without moving your head. And so we stand in front of this light box, and you get anchored at a center point, and lights go off all over, and it's all sensed with timing. And so you can see how quickly did I see the light? Did I hit the bar? Did I hit it? How quickly did I hit it? And did I actually hit it in the right spot to turn it out? And so you do this where these lights are going all over the place. It's so cool because it's mental and physical. And what I say is, it's driving a race car is doing, you're 100% mentally involved and 100% physically involved and stressed. And you park your emotions. If you get mad, if you get angry, if you get frustrated, everything goes down the toilet. So you have to really stay visually active and acuitive, and you have to react, and you have to anticipate if you anticipate that the light's going to go on over here, and the light goes on over here, oh, that's hitting the wall. I mean, you thought, it's just so cool because it blends all of the physical and mental activity capabilities that each individual has.
So every sport, in general terms, has got qualities that really engender them to become really superior to it. What would that be for racing?
Well, I think it's concentration, focus, concentration, discipline, decision making, and making the right decisions, and then obviously physical fitness, but not, I mean, if you look at the race drivers are fit, but they aren't necessarily going to be muscle, they're not going to lift more weights than somebody next to them. So I think it's mostly mental. So it's the physical, it's the concentration, focus, and discipline and decision making that are those qualities that have to be better than average.
You broke the ceiling for women in one respect as far as race car driving is concerned. And you certainly were involved at the very beginning when obviously you mentioned that they weren't even allowed into certain areas. So tell me a little bit about that. Did you encounter a lot of gender bias in what is typically a male-dominated sport?
Well, I think we look at things differently when we reflect on them than when they're actually happening. And so when I look back, I realized that in 1973, Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs, if you happen to remember watching that on TV, and I played tennis a lot, and that was so huge. I mean, it was it was on national television, and And that was bigger than just a tennis match. I think it changed a lot of ways people think about women. And I think somehow that may have had an impact on me, because in 1973, at the end of that year, is when I went to driver's school and ordered that Pinto. So I think it kind of gave me permission to just go do something that I had this desire to do. Once I started racing, even in the Pinto, it was like the whole woman thing, it just went out the window, because I had so many things to learn and so much to do. And you know, when you go to the races, and you guys know, when you race, and everybody's so consumed with their own deal, getting their own car ready to go to the track and get it ready when it's at the track and fixing it when it breaks, and nobody's paying that much attention to what anybody else is doing. And then what I loved about the sport as well, women are judged by society so much by how they look, about how they dress and how they look. When you put a race suit on, you look like the Pillsbury Doughboy. I mean, all of a sudden, you know, your physical appearance really doesn't matter. And you put a helmet on, they can't even see you. And so it was so cool to just go into this sort of, I don't want to even call it gender, I call it a gender neutral sport, but this genderless position of all of a sudden I'm in this car, it's me and the car, and nobody can say anything about how I look or what my smile is or yada, yada, yada. So it's the lap times, you know, it's how did your lap time go? And then at the end of the race weekend, I would go to get my trophy, and sometimes they'd say, oh, did your husband win this? And I'm like, no, it's me, you know. But it's just somehow it went all out the window, and I realized, and I used to tell everybody then, and I told everybody even during the 90s at Indy, I don't represent all women. I only represent myself and what my capabilities are. But what I learned particularly during the 90s at Indy, was that I had to get over that and realize that to other people, I may have been representing women and not just me. So you have to start opening your thoughts in life about what other people are actually thinking, and not just about what you're thinking, but not let that change how you do things. Just appreciate, you know, and don't try to get into an argument about it. And so I would then, you know, be more comfortable with the fact that and that's why I wanted to help the young up and coming drivers and the other women. But I just think it's a gender neutral sport. I mean, it's, you know, I said I'd never have pink on my car unless it was part of the sponsorship deal. I never wanted to promote the fact that I was a woman. I didn't want to draw attention to the fact that I was a woman. But then Secret Deodorant had pink on their cars and their logo, so I had to put pink on the car. So, but I look at what Pippa Mann has done. I mean, she had the Susan G. Komen Foundation as her, and I finally figured it out. It wasn't her sponsor. Do you realize that? I thought, and I questioned that. I thought, how could a not-for-profit sponsor a race car, right? They're supposed to be promoting cancer, you know, raising money for cancer research and to help women cancers. The reality was, Pippa Mann went out and generated the sponsorship from individuals to pay for her to be able to be in that car, and then put the Susan G. Komen Foundation on there for exposure and to help raise money. So I mean, she kind of made a double impact on that, and I didn't know that until recently, and so I really respect that. And she's, you know, got her pink helmet and all that. So maybe society, I'm glad I didn't have to do that, because I just wouldn't have been in that mode. But I think I call it a gender neutral sport, and I have never really felt, except on occasion when people, you know, are crappy, that it was a big deal.
You said something that really had an impact on me, so much so that at dinner last night I repeated it, because it does talk about that. You said the car doesn't know I'm a woman.
Yeah, I mean, when the guys start, or anybody, but particularly the guys start hassling you, and I'm like, you know, the car doesn't know I'm a woman. It doesn't say, oh, I got a chick driving me, so I'm not going to give it all my horsepower, you know. I mean, it's there. It's an innate object, you know, and it's what you do with it. And I mean, at the same time, there was expectations. I mean, I'm not a mechanic, but I had to learn as much of the mechanic as I could. And unfortunately, my brain was in that direction. I had an aptitude for that kind of stuff. But I also found out there's a lot of guys that don't know, you know, aren't mechanics either. So that's not a gender-driven thing. It's just how passionate you are, how much you're dedicated to what you're doing. And when people see that and respect that, then I think even that whole gender thing goes out of their brain. You know, they're like, oh, well, that's no big deal. Yeah, so.
Let's shift a little bit to preparation. Are there specific things, there are a lot of different sports that people have a certain set of things they do right before they take off or before they, swing that club, hit that bat? What exactly do you do?
That's a good question. Preparation is like one of the most important things to me for success in anything, but I was really dedicated to the preparation for a race car driver is one of the hardest sports in my opinion. I mean, I play tennis, I mentioned. Now, if I was going to play in a tennis tournament, I'd go out that whole week, practice my serve, practice my forehand, practice my backhand, if I was, whatever. I mean, I would go through, I knew what I had to do and I could prepare it in reality, in real terms, and then go compete. Well, driving in the street is not preparing us to drive race cars. And you don't just get to go out and practice per se. Our practice is at the event, at the race event. So how do you prepare in between races? And that's where these training tools that I'm talking about, physical and mental, you can exercise your brain, you can exercise your body, you can do cardiovascular exercise to keep your heart rate up. So, and then you also now with technology, I'd also study, a lot of the graphs and the data that they would collect. And I would look at, traces on the graph to understand, okay, this is the racetrack I'm at, this is where my breaking points are, and this is, how I can be better and all that. So preparation is different, but it's most important to success in racing. What you were referring to me is more habits or hobbies, or not hobbies, but I mean routines. And if you get too rigid into a routine, I think that's a little scary because every place you go is a different part. I mean, I even just try to prepare that I have the right kind of food. The guys would all have, at the trailers, we all have food that they give us. And they have people that go out and, bring the food in. Well, then there was Lyn's cooler, and so then they used to get razzed about that because I wanted certain things to eat and drink. So you could try to control your elements as much as you can, but when you travel all over the country and you got all these different places you're going and demands that all the people have on you, if you have too rigid of a routine and you're depending on that routine to perform and that routine gets upset because of circumstances out of your control, then I'm like, so I think be careful you don't get into too much of this rigid, this is the way we always do it, like putting one glove on, one hand on at the same time and all, I don't know, that's, somebody, all of a sudden you can't find your right glove, you can't say, wait a minute, I can't find my right glove, I got to put it on first, you got to be careful about some of that stuff.
Well, what about right before that race starts? Do you say a prayer, or do you, I'm not trying to get too personal, but is there, it's kind of a dangerous sport, and do you find a way to actually find your inner focus?
Well, the key to a successful athlete is to understand how we function individually, and I learned how to do this. This was a part of my training that when I went to these guys from McGill University who taught me this, and I found out that is personalized. I mean, Emerson Fittipaldi and some of maybe the more Brazilian type, they like jump up and down and do exercises or whatever, get all hyped up before they get in the car. I fall asleep. Actually, when I get in, I want to be in the car early. I've always wanted to be in the car early, and then I sit there and I just get into a zone. I mean, I think, like while we're here, and I'm paying attention, but I'm not having to concentrate too terribly, and so I can see a lot of peripheral things. Where when it comes about an hour before the race, all those peripheral things just start to clear. So all of a sudden, it's like all of this stuff over here and up there and. Hi, I didn't know you guys were up there. That starts to go away, and I just start, not tunnel vision, but I just start to clearly focus on and clear my head to the point that particularly then I'm in the car early, we're on the grid and things are all happening, and then sometimes they run late, there's something wrong with the track or with something, and that's when I've fallen asleep. I get into such a good zone of emptiness to a certain degree and comfort that I sort of buzz out a little bit. They kick the car, Lyn, I'm all right, I'm here. But, so for me, I need to be very calm. And every athlete needs to know what they need. And that's what I learned that I needed.
Now, I read through your book last night, Incredible Journey, for those who haven't seen it yet. And you have these wonderful endings to the paragraph.
Pit stops.
Pit stops, exactly. And there was one that kind of struck me. You said, first, be sure to find out what the rules are. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on what that means.
Glad you picked that one. I don't remember all my pit stops. Yeah, I found out, a lot of this I learned in a lot of my sponsorship meetings and all of that, and dealing with a lot of women in a lot of different industries, from a lot of different places and a lot of different generations. When you're really smart, and you stand out maybe because you're smart, but then you stand out because you're not the same as everybody else, so whether you're a woman or male. And then you think, oh, well, why do they do it this way? You know, or I'm going to get out there, I'm going to change it. And then there's all this resistance to change. So I just over time, I came up with a philosophy that I believe in, which is you got to play by the rules. First of all, you got to know what the rules are. Every year they change the frickin' rules in racing. I mean, they give you a whole new rule book. And even this happens, you know, if the crew guys don't pay attention and they don't read the new rules, oh, well, we did it that way all the time. Well, they change the rules. So you got to read the rules and know what the rules are. And you got to play by the rules. And you got to win by the rules. And if you win enough, then you can start thinking about changing the rules. And you got to go through the steps. And no matter how smart you are, or no matter how whatever you think you are, you can't just show up and decide that it all should be done differently. And I think that's what has set a lot of people back in being able to make change in society or in anything. So I've just found that to be what I call a sort of a mantra, you know, and is to come in, assess things, figure it out, integrate yourself into it, you know, and then be successful, and then say, okay, now we're doing it this way.
That kind of leads me to my next question. You have been doing a lot of mentoring of female drivers now. Talk a little bit about that, and as well your 501c3.
C3, yeah. Well, I got so much fan mail after doing Indy. I mean, I've always, as an athlete, you're always focused on yourself and on your own preparation and on being your best. And to be honest, you don't spend a lot of time necessarily caring about other people, because you got to pay a lot of attention to caring about yourself and taking care of yourself. And so, but when I got to Indy and I got all this fan mail, and all this fan mail wasn't just about wanting an autograph, it was wanting advice. And I'm like, I don't know who these people are, and I don't know what their skills are, their capabilities are, their resources are, or anything. And so I really felt, and I was blessed to meet Billie Jean King and to work with the Women's Sports Foundation in the 80s, and I started to understand that you could actually make a difference in other people's lives. So I created a 501c3. I couldn't believe it when the government passed that, because I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I created a driver development program, which was before driver development was sort of, now everybody has driver development programs, but this was in 1994. And what I wanted to do was bring these people that were sending me mail and wanting advice to come and to gather in one place at one time, where I can bring experts in fitness, and the people that were helping me in media training, in the business of the sport, what to do with their money if they ever actually have any, and team owners, and bring in experts to talk to these people. And I insisted they all bring their parents with them, because if you're still living at home, your parents are really who are deciding what you're going to do with your life. So I did that for about 25 years. We trained over 230 drivers from 7 countries and 33 states, and about 98% females. I did not want, there were some guys that actually came, Andy Lally, BJ Zacharias, some of the drivers that are doing fairly well right now, and to give them this advice. Well, the world has changed, and now people don't necessarily go someplace because they're always so busy already racing. Everything does online, and that was getting to be complicated. So I created a scholarship program with the help of Paul Newman, who gave me the first $10,000 to start it, called Project Podium. And I put it under the Women's Sports Foundation so that I had a better way that I could get out and find out who the best drivers were, and then go out and help them individually and not have to worry about the paperwork. So the Women's Sports Foundation handles that. So Project Podium exists with the Women's Sports Foundation. We've helped a number of drivers, about 20 of them at this point. One that's, you can make a note, everybody says, who's the next best? Courtney Crone is a young 16-year-old who's racing in open wheel for the first time this year, or last year she did it, and this year is her second year. She lives out of California, and I just see she's one of the ones that we're really working closely with. So, you know, I say I look for the cream, and I get a lot of milk. And there's a lot of really good race car drivers out there, and that's not good enough. If you're going to make it, you have to be better than good. There's only a few greats, but there's better than good. You know, you've got to be exceptional.
You brought up an interesting point, which I think is true for most people today, which is you've got to be the complete package. You mentioned the media and the sponsors. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I would imagine it's kind of a foreign concept for a lot of people to actually have to engage in those worlds.
Yeah, the sport has changed. It's obviously, when I tell these young drivers and parents, is that once you get anything, I don't care if you get parts, somebody gives you free tires, somebody gives you free brake pads, somebody gives you, once there's an exchange, it's business. It's now a business. You now have some obligation, and find out what that obligation is to the other side. So, and they don't think of it that way. They just think that, wasn't that nice that somebody, you know, gave me some free stuff. And so you have to understand that if you are going to be in the sport beyond paying and doing everything on your own, then it becomes a business. And I was lucky. I used to own an auto parts business. I mean, I was in business before I started racing. So I really understood that. I went to trade shows and all that. And now the sport demands that. I mean, if you read anything about Alexander Rossi or Hinchcliffe, they all, and of course with social media now, they're all working all the time. I mean, they're either working on their own brand and their own identity, or they're working with sponsors. And so it is a business. And if you can't be comfortable with that, I know so many racers who won races and expect the world to come to them because they did. Well, you know what? There's a race next weekend. Somebody else is going to win. I mean, you're only as good as your last race. And it just takes the whole package now. It really does. And that's what I've been actually working, you know, with our driver development. That's partly what I was trying to prepare them for. I mean, Danica got it.
So I think it's time to kind of bring us full circle, shall we say. How did your mother ultimately end up reacting to all of this?
Oh, poor Mom. She used to light a candle, I found out, every race I did. And I'd always call her at the end of the race, and she'd say, good, I can blow the candle out. But it would always be, particularly if I had a good race, it'd always be like, so are you all done now? Like, no. She kept wanting it to be over. And then when it got on television, then things became a little better because she got to watch her daughter on TV. But, she was proud of me, I know, but she worried. I mean, she was a mom, and she worried. So, but, she was a NASCAR fan, and she was a big Bill Elliott fan. And I mean, I'd call her sometimes after a race, and I'd hear all about how Bill did. And I'm like, Mom, I just wanted to call and tell you, what I did. But she had an eye. She would not only tell me how he did, but, his car was really handling well. And I could really, watching a race with her was fun because she had that eye. She could tell by the attitude of the car whose car was working and whose car wasn't. And she was damn right, I was like amazed.
So I can't thank you enough. This has been incredibly stimulating.
Thank you. I want to say one more thing. Thank you. But this is a beautiful exhibit. I mean, I've been to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, and I've been to a lot of other museums that have had IndyCar exhibits, race car exhibits. I think this is really beautifully done. I mean, it's a great selection representing almost every era, and presented in such a way you can really process it. You're not overwhelmed and distracted and all of that, and it's beautifully done. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. And of course, Lyn will be available with her book. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Insider at Heritage Museums and Gardens. We've been speaking with Indy driver, record setter, and broadcast personality Lyn St. James. You can hear more interviews like this one by finding us on iTunes. And of course, more information about Heritage Museums and Gardens, our current Indy 500 exhibit, and upcoming programming can be found on our website at heritagemuseums.org. Until next time, thank you so much for listening.